Hey there. Today I have Annalyn Schooley with us. Sorry, I shook the computer there for a second. um, and she is back to do part 2 of our masterclass. So we promised that after the art and science of therapy as craft, and talking about those basic skills, that Annalyn would come back and talk to us about crafting questions, which will be part 2, and then eventually we'll have the advanced part 3. So Annalyn, thank you so much for being here today.
Great to be back.
Yay. So please give us a summary of what we talked, very briefly about what we talked about last time, and then feel free to kind of connect to where we're headed today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So last time we basically talked about joining and, that joining up, like joining the horse herd, right? To be a part of the family system. The basic skills that we talked about, the micro skills we talked about, were back channeling, validating, empathizing, and summarizing, and use of client language. So basically those 5 things. And we gave examples of each of those, and those are kind of the building blocks for the kind of the next thing. So by joining, by entering the client's world, you in essence then get permission to do the next part, which is to ask questions. So if you don't do all that joining stuff and enter their world, the questions are going to get spit out basically. And so since that's not your goal, you want to smooth the path so that they will answer questions for you. So there are many different places you can go to find out about questions, and there are entire books, 1001 solution-focused questions that you can look at questions. And the evolution of circular questions has a wonderful set of charts that I often tell my interns, just copy the charts and throw them in the bathroom and look at them every time you're in there, and so that they kind of embed in your mind these questions. And by the way, just a warning, after you learn how to craft questions, when you watch TV and listen to interviewers, you will hate their questions because they're awful. They're just really awful.
I would think you also notice when someone's a particularly good interviewer.
Yes, but only by becoming a good questioner yourself, you'll begin to notice really crummy interviewers. Yeah, unfortunately. So that's I guess it's like when you become a better writer, you notice lousy writing, but and appreciate better writing. So that's why I strongly recommend reading case studies so that you can gather up questions. Books like the Milan Systemic Family Therapy book, Michael White's Maps of Narrative Practice, anything that has transcript of therapists is a great place to collect good kinds of questions. So there's other writers that have gone into this in far more detail than I have, of different types of questions, but I've come up with basically four types. I'm a simple person, so I have 4 types, right? The yes, no, the direct, simple answer, relational, and circular. Okay. So yes, no questions are obviously what they sound like they are. Yes, no is one of the answers, either yes or no. And those are very important questions. You need to ask those kinds of questions. For me, they're the fork in the road kind of things. Are we talking about this, or are we talking about that? So it helps to know where I'm going. That's the beauty of yes, no questions. The difficulty is that in our culture, we're really good at asking yes, no questions, and we will ask that kind of question unintentionally. So anything that starts with do you, can you, would you, have you, all of those beginnings are automatically a yes, no question. Yes.
Can I jump in for a second? So
please.
I just had this thought flash.
I just saw it go by. Yes.
Yeah, I can't really hide those things. So one thing is, I was wondering in therapy, when you're working with a client that has been with you for a little while, how they might experience the yes, no question if it's not your typical question. So I guess my thought is more that the client should know that you're doing something with a yes, no question automatically because you don't live there, so to speak. Does that make
Yes.
sense? Like they can switch if they know you well enough and you're like living in relational and circular questions. When you ask a yes, no question, they're automatically going to know, okay,
This is a different kind of question.
If it's like a quick answer, or like it already cues them into what you're trying to do without you necessarily having to explain.
I think that would be optimal, right? I think though, because most of us aren't that intentional, we don't think, we're so busy thinking about other stuff that we're not thinking about our crafting, which is why I am recommending that people practice crafting questions.
Sure.
Just sitting and writing them, you know. The open question that we want to move to, right, is direct open questions. Direct open questions start with who, what, where, when, how. You can use why, but I tell people I'll take that away and give it back to you at graduation. But who, what, where, when, how. Why? Who, what, where, when, how, right? Okay, those five. I would say all open questions start with that. But not all questions that start with that are open. So how many sisters do you have is a short answer. So that would be a closed question because it's a short answer. But again, very important. You can't build a genogram without asking those kind of questions. So you got to ask them. So it's not that yes, no questions or closed direct answer kind of questions are bad. It's if that's the only kind you ask, then that's the only kind of data you'll get.
Yeah.
And
I don't think that's therapy.
Well, it's a sham of, it's a shadow of therapy. It's an interview. It is an interview. And that's the kind of interview that you might see on Larry King or whoever does interviews, you know.
Yeah, or maybe just if you're in charge of only doing intakes or biopsychosocials, although
absolutely
some of them sometimes include open-ended, but perhaps that might be your role, and so you tend to ask.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at a biopsychosocial, it's basically just a bunch of closed questions, short answer questions. Absolutely. And it builds the data you need to begin to ask the fancier questions, the more dynamic, systemic, relational kinds of questions. So you have to have that to start with. I can't ask a circular question about the relationship between mom and sister if I don't know that mom and sister exist, right? So got to have that information. So, so I guess you could kind of think of them as biopsychosocial or genogram kind of questions, you know, the yes, no's and the short answers. And I once had a person who was struggling with questions. So I had her put who, what, where, when, how on a 3x5 card that she taped to the wall behind the client's head. So that she'd remember to use those words to start her questions. Because otherwise, it's very easy in our culture to start with, do you think? Could you, why did you, right? Those kinds of starts. But if you see those words, and now you all can hallucinate them behind my head, is that instead of do you think, you could say, how did you decide to? So what was the process by which you, who would most be concerned about, right? So you get different data. I'm thinking like a qualitative researcher. You get different data when you ask different kinds of questions. And so if you're not used to asking these kinds of questions, then practice. Listen to other people. Watch TV and listen to them ask lousy questions and recraft it. How would you redo it? The ultimate is to record your session and go back through and write every question you asked and check, was that open or closed, and did I intend it to be that way?
Yeah, I ask, well, I'm sure I learned this from you, but I ask interns to do that and to do that in their transcription. What was the intention?
Yeah, to analyze it. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, make it better. So if it was closed, make it open. If it was open, make it relational. If it was relational, make it circular. Bump it up a level, right? So that you just practice, so that this becomes something that is in muscle memory, as opposed to, I have to think, okay, the relational question, I have to make them stand in somebody else's shoes, and okay, and so all of that cogitating going on, right? This becomes, it gets to be the point where you hallucinate the people in the room and just go, oh, that's right, I'm hallucinating Dad. So if Dad were here, what would he tell me? You automatically think of relational questions because of that process of having practiced.
Right. So that's relational question, which is the second.
Right. All right. So we've got the yes, no, we've got the closed single action, which is a direct question, right? Direct questions. You have your basic, well, actually, I think now that I'm thinking there's a fifth type. There's the direct open question. Direct open question. So how did you decide to sneak out of the house? It's a direct question. I'm asking you directly. It's open. How did you decide? Which means you have to tell me a story, right? Those are give me a story kind of questions. All right. So it's open, but I'm asking it directly of one person's opinion. All right. Now, if I go relational, I'm asking the person I'm asking needs to stand in somebody else's shoes and look at the situation through their eyes to be able to just answer the question. So when I turn to ask Mom what was going on when you snuck out of the house, what is she going to tell me? So daughter has to not just, well, Mom is going to be pissed off, or Mom is going to tell you I'm a terrible person. Whoa, wait a minute. So imagine, get inside Mom and tell me, what is she really going to tell me? You know her better than I do. I used to have to package it. We're going to talk about packaging in a second. You got to put all this context around it so that you're really, now that I think of it, it's almost like hypnosis trance, right? I'm putting them into that context so that they can stand in it and talk to me from that place. So that's what packaging kind of helps to do. But anyway, so that's the relational question, standing in somebody else's shoes and talking from their perspective, not from your own perspective.
Answering, now, is it fair to say answering as if you were them?
Yes, except of course, it is still their opinion.
Right. Right. I mean, you can't get out of that.
Right. So, exactly. But it does invite people to imagine other perspectives. Mm-hmm. That's a hallmark of what we do, is to have multiple perspectives in the room, as many as possible.
It's more empathic too. Like I was recently reading Flaska, who makes a distinction between empathy and curiosity. And he says that curiosity is actually the method of the family therapist, marriage and family therapist. So let's just say systemic therapist, versus empathy that might be the modus operandi or the method of the individualistic perspective. So anyway, I just found that interesting in that we can invite family members to be not only empathic of their family members, but also be curious about their experience of situations and traumas, etc.
Absolutely. And of course, these become money questions when I ask one person, what is someone else going to say? And they're absolutely wrong. And they person number one imagined the worst, and person number two said, no, I was concerned. I wasn't angry. Okay. So now we've introduced new information into the family, right? And that's where all the possibilities are. And I didn't have to do anything but ask a question. Question is intervention. So that's why I think crafting questions is so important, because every question you ask has the potential for opening up all whole new worlds for the family to experience that they probably would never have done if not for this stranger sitting among them saying, I don't know how things are around here, so let me ask these dumb questions, right? And what's interesting for me as a therapist is you can ask a question that you feel like, I mean, I've asked this a million times of all different sorts of families. It's never gone anywhere. And this one time it opened the door and all this light comes in. Cool.
Yeah.
This is fun for me too now, right? So I never know when it's going to happen, and that's kind of that's the joy of this work, is what's going to happen. It's
Can
like,
happen at any moment.
eating the popcorn. What's going to happen next, right?
Yes.
It's of course, and it's all about my entertainment. It's not really, but yeah, that's how I keep myself entertained and engaged in this process.
I think that's hope too. I think that's what's great about the therapist's hope for the client, that, wow, there could be a shift at any moment. And
any moment.
as
Yes.
I learn and ask things and, talk to them and engage.
Yep.
Yeah. There's, Bowen also talks about what the question that may never have been asked, or things that you may never have learned had you not asked, or had the conversation, a courageous conversation. So he's talking about his interaction with his parents, but of course that relates to therapy as well.
Absolutely. Well, and Michael White talks about the implicit, right? The implicit but unsaid, right? And so you got to get it said so that so everybody can be in on it and have the information that now could be the key to everything. But I never know it. That's the fun part of doing this work, is I never know when the key is going to turn in the lock.
It makes it so weighty though too. Like, in a way it's light and fun, but it's also weighty in the sense that we have to remember that we've been invited into a system that we're not a part of technically, right? Because then we can
but once we step in, we are a part of. Yes,
right. This can lead to another conversation, but in the sense that we've been invited for a time to help say the unsaid, and I think that puts some weight and responsibility on our ability to ask important
hence
questions.
Being a craft person.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
right. Learn your craft, because every chip of the chisel is going to make a mark in the edifice of this family. And so you want to come with your tools well sharpened, and well oiled, and you have a steady hand, right? When you do this stuff. Exactly. I don't know what the family's going to bring, but I know what I bring. And if I bring my best questions, my thoughtfulness, my understanding of I'm so itchy today, sorry. That if I'm very aware of using my basic joining skills, and I'm very mindful of doing it's not like I'm going to join for a little bit and then I just get to pepper them with questions, that I'm constantly weaving in, validating, empathizing, summarizing, that the questions I craft, whether they be open, closed, direct, relational, circular, that I'm using client language to craft them, right? So it's that they give me the input, they give me the words, and then I craft a question out of it, right? I don't just pull it from no place. I pull it from what they have said, right? So they tell me about the sister, because I said, how many sisters do you have? They tell me about the sister. And so I'm going to later talk about, so if your sister was here, how would she describe the relationship between you and your mom? That's a circular question, asking one person to comment on the relationship of two others. And then on top of that, I made it relational by having someone imagine they were sister to talk about that.
Whoa. Just kidding.
Well, those kind of questions take a lot of words. Right. And there's a lot of moving parts, but then that's what we do as family therapists, is we manage lots of moving parts. So we have to have questions to be able to manage that.
This reminds me, is it remembering in narrative therapy, where the questions are about a past experience or a person that is really significant in one's life, and inviting stories, again, that inviting stories that haven't been told, but also the way in which we invite the telling.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get out, it's always easy for us to get fancy. Let's first get the basics, right? So if you want a yes or a no, then ask a yes/no question. That's what you're looking for. Then ask that kind of question. if you're looking for a story, don't ask a yes/no question. Now, clients often will be very cooperative and will answer a yes/no question by telling us a story, but it may not be the story you were looking for. It may not be the piece of the pie that you wanted, or that you may not realize. Now they've gone off and told this story, which may have introduced information in the room that you really didn't want to have. Okay, so now you're gonna have to backtrack and go get the piece you wanted. All right.
Yes.
But sometimes you don't know the piece that you wanted until you've asked it. You ask it and go, oh, whoops, I really didn't want that. So whoa. So let me ask this over here. So, but that's the purpose of yes/no questions, right? To figure out, what am I going this way, or am I going that way? Do you want to save your marriage or not? Right? Are you concerned about your son's grades, or are you more concerned about his safety? Right? It's an either or kind of establishing direction kind of question, right? And then we talked about the short answer open questions that start with who, what, where, when, how. How many sisters do you have? How old are you? Where were you on the night of January 14th? Those, those kinds of things, right? And then there's the open question that invites a story. So how did you decide to sneak out at night? Which is the variation on why. When I have people who like why, I take it away from them and say, I'll give it back to you when you study narrative. But I tell them, if you say why all the time, then practice finding some other way to ask that question. Why did you do that can turn into how did you decide to do that? Mm-hmm. So it's also examining our habits of language, just as we talked about the back channeling, the person who said okay 50 times in the session, and really many of them really was really not okay. That's a habit of language that you want to become aware of, so that you do what you do purposefully, and you're not just a victim of your own linguistic habits. And that's why you practice crafting questions. So then we talked about relational questions, asking someone to stand in the shoes of somebody else. And we asked about circular questions, one person commenting on the relationship of two others. And those two others don't have to be people. So I can ask one person to comment on mom's relationship with church, or dad's relationship with work, or brother's relationship with school. It can be institutions that they're in relationship with. If you're a narrative therapist, you might have them ask about the relationship between a person and the externalized problem. So tell me how mom first met anger. So tell me how brother first met the blue meanies, or whatever it is that we've externalized the problem as. So that's another use of the circular question, which designed by the Milan people to get a sense of the dynamics between people. So you get content, you get story, but you also get a sense of the relationship between people. The old classic communication theory, report and command, right? And so they're telling me this language, but whether they mean to or not, they're also sending me the information about the relationship. Mm-hmm. All of which is terribly valuable to us to understand how all these things are, all these folks and ideas are connected together into this kind of web. Right? And we're not exactly the spider. We might be a breeze that touches a little bit of the web and then sends energy throughout the system. Kind of that's our function. I wouldn't give us as much power as the spider, because the spider actually creates the web. We're just sort of the breeze that knocks it a little bit.
Is it possible that clients then take our way of asking questions, or even the ability to talk about things in a new way from therapy? Or that's what we hope, that that the breeze can blow while they're home without us.
Well, certainly there are models that are very specific to that actually literally teach that. EFT right. does that, Gottman does that, assertiveness training does that, right? So it literally teaches people how to do I statements and stuff like that.
I'm assuming staying away from teaching.
Well, I it has not been my experience that as a result of my asking good relational circular questions, that they start asking each other that stuff.
People pick up on it, right?
I've not had that experience that people do that, because most people don't think that carefully about what they say.
Or what they hear.
I actually had an intern who brought a story back to me. I said, sometimes the way you ask questions, particularly if you work really hard to think of a really clear question that will be so outside of the client's experience that they can't hear it.
Yeah.
And so the intern brought a story back to me that she asked the same question 12 times before the client could hear the question.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so sometimes we have to deliver our more complex question in little bitty pieces. So Illy, when you're at the store with your daughter, now some of you will notice that I've now moved into hypnosis trance by feeding her little pieces and transporting her into that environment. Okay, so when you're at the store with your child, and she starts to pitch a fit, right? She can see that.
Me.
She can see that. Oh, sorry. All right,
no, I'm kidding.
right. So, but in a way, it sort of does, if not trigger, it certainly is evocative for the client. Okay.
Yeah,
so when she does it, and you look around to the people in the store, who are you most worried about is watching? Okay, so if I say that all in a rush, you don't get the benefit of putting them there. So crafting questions, the actual words are very important. And if you've just told me a story of how one of the things that drives you crazy is how your daughter pitches fit when you're out in public, right? So I'm going to use that to craft this question. I pulled it out of the air just now, but if we were in conversation, I would have pulled it from stuff you said to me.
Not really, though, because you know that I have a daughter. You know that she's young.
Well, I have knowledge.
You know that she's at the age that she might pitch fits.
Yes, yeah. But pitching a fit is my language,
it's
right?
Your language, and it's open for interpretation by me, of course.
Right. And if we were in conversation, this is where the client language piece is important. I wouldn't say pitch a fit unless you use those words. If you had said she threw a tantrum, then I would use that language, right? I would not reinterpret that unless I was on purpose doing a reframe. And I think we talked about that last time, right? So the use of client language, if you're not doing a reframe, use what the clients say. And that's the same when you craft those questions, right? So you would absolutely do it in a summary, validating, empathizing statement, and you would still use it in a question. In fact, this moves me now to packaging, which is the putting together of that validating, empathizing client language piece, out of which then comes your question. So I would do a summary. So Illy, one of the reasons you're here today is because you're really struggling with your daughter. She does, you called it tantrums, right? So she throws tantrums, but usually not at home, usually out in public places. And so when you are in a public place and she's throwing one of those tantrums and you look around yourself, who are you most concerned is watching, right? So summary, out of which comes this question, using your language. And I'm asking you to give me a direct answer about who are you worried is watching. And then I might follow that up with a relational question of, and so what are they seeing? What are, when you see that store manager and you're worried about what he or she is thinking, what would they be seeing? If we could get them in here, what would they say they're seeing? See, that's a relational question. So direct question followed by a relational question.
So the packaging is of the question that you're about to ask. You put it within the context of what you know. And as you're saying, using all the basic skills as you're
validating, empathizing, summarizing. Yes.
Right. Through all of that. And then you choose the type of question that is most relevant to the information that you want.
Well, yeah. And I I probably am not going, okay, let me spin the dial and which question am I going to, it's, but, and it's not even, what would be best right now? Relational question? No, I'm not, after a while, for me, I'm very visual. So as I'm putting you in the store, I'm there with you. I'm standing next to you. Okay, here's you, the child, the store manager. And so I'm just asking questions about what I'm seeing, if I've hallucinated in there with you, seeing, to ask questions about that.
Of course. Yeah. I don't think we can be that intentional from that perspective, like from an intellectual, like these are my choices.
Right.
Unless maybe you have that thing.
Yeah, behind that, yes, yeah, exactly. Right, yeah, right.
Learning,
spin the dial. Okay, I'm going to ask a who question now. So, but certainly I think we can be that analytical when we transcribe, and we notice our own patterns, and we notice, gee, I thought I was asking all these open questions, and they're not. They're all do you, can you, would you, should use, right? They're all these yes, no, and judgmental kinds of questions. Right? I like to say leading the witness. They'll start to say, do you think? And I go, leading the witness. Yeah. Right?
Or don't you think, right? Don't you?
Yeah, don't you think? Yeah, right. That's worse. Well, as Dougherty would say, the only way you could make it worse is to go, yes, but don't you think? Yes.
Well, and I noticed this too in my life, right? And I was having a conversation with a friend's husband. He's also my friend, but about parents and like our parents' generation, and the fact that they asked a question but it wasn't really a question. He brought that up, right? So they weren't really asking, and I distinctly remember having an experience like that with my in-laws, where they asked me like if something was okay for dinner, and I kind of had braces at the time, and I said and then they said, well, we'll adjust and get you utensils or something. So I remember thinking, I don't think you were asking me, right? You were saying this is what's for dinner, and we'll,
Yes, but you were forming it as if it were a question.
I answered it because I thought they were asking me a question.
Right. You weren't listening to the command. You were responding to the report.
Right.
Yes.
So this happens to me a lot because I shouldn't say a lot, but I answer the question that I'm asked, and I assume that if you ask me a question, that you want an answer to the question that you asked.
Yeah, see, I'm much more of a pain in the ass, because I will say, are you really asking me if it's okay, or are you just telling me this is what we're having and you're being polite?
Right, I will do that, but now I didn't know then. I didn't know that was a thing, right? So
this is pre your training in marriage and family. Gotcha.
No, but it was pre my understanding of their linguistic habits, I guess, right? So now I mean, it was early, so now I understand. But then there's like the whole thing, how you figure out, can you be direct with this person or not, right? So in my own family, I'm very direct. Yeah, like, are you really asking? Like with my husband, I'll say that, or with my own family of origin. But then, how do you choose what family rules to follow when it's not your family and you haven't broken them? You haven't like smashed them.
Right. So as a therapist,
exactly,
right, you don't have time to wait around a couple of years and date them for a long time before you decide to get engaged with them and then actually have some sort of impact on the family. We don't have that kind of time. We got 10, 12 sessions, maybe 5 to get something cooking, right?
Right. And I guess you don't really need, and I'm giving that as an example to say, we hit all these things as therapists. I mean, in our lives and in therapy, but I'm saying in therapy with families. But more importantly, we notice those things between family members, and it doesn't require, or as you're saying, it's not necessary to wait it out.
Yeah, and because they've come to therapy, the clients generally expect that we're going to do this kind of stuff. Now, you can package it, right? Interns will often say to me, oh, I could never ask that question. I say, okay, so let's package it. Let's say, okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that I'm afraid you're really going to be pissed off about. And it's not my intention, right? But I'd not be doing my job if I don't ask this question. And so here's the question, right? Now, if they get pissed off, I win because I predicted it. If they don't get pissed off, I win because they didn't get pissed off. And either way, I got the question out there, right? And that's how you package a question to give it context.
Yeah, and I do that. I talk about that a lot, but I don't think I've used the word packaging. I talk about clinical I statements, I guess, or clinical transparency. Like, I am a little worried, or it's like they experience it as vulnerability on your part, but it's clinical. It's not, it's not.
Right. And I'm thinking, I don't really care if you're mad, but I'm giving you a heads up so that you can kind of strap in. Yeah, right, that they can kind of strap in and, oh, okay, all right, what is she going to ask me, and so if it's a tough question that, oh, I'm that I am feeling really annoyed about that. Okay, so let's talk about that, right? It's okay to be annoyed. I don't have to live with you, right? So be annoyed with me for this hour,
or see you at Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't have to be nice over Thanksgiving turkey. Right. So this is, we have a lot of leeway, but as you said earlier, that means we have a lot of responsibility. And I guess I got the idea, the concept of packaging from Ron Chennai. Now, I don't know where he got it, but I got it from him. And the way I visualize it is that sometimes our questions can have sharp edges.
Yeah.
And so I want to package a lot of bubble wrap around it, with a lot of summary and validating and empathizing and context. I want to put a lot of bubble wrap around it so when I hand it to you, that it won't bite you.
Right. And it's also appropriate, like in your personal life, as you figure all these things out, to take your time and kind of notice the nuances and decide how you're going to step in. But in therapy, you don't have to worry about the sharp edges. Say it anyway, but it's how, like you're saying, use your skills. And,
well, Gottman talks about softened startups and things like that, and which is the same kind of idea, is packaging, right?
Disclaimers. I call them disclaimers.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
I like start with a disclaimer and then
yeah, right. So in both therapy and in other relationships, the purpose is the same. It's to maintain the relationship. Because if I piss you off so much that you walk out, then we've broken the relationship, right? So I want to preserve the relationship. So it's about moving things forward, but I need to do so expeditiously. So how are the ways that I can do it expeditiously and still maintain the relationship, but not fall in love with you? That's the balance. I'm not your spouse. I'm your therapist, right? But I have to use some of the same techniques.
And you have, like, as you're saying, I interpret you saying not fall in love with you as you keeping your sharpness and your edge.
Well, I need to keep my sharpness, but I also need to keep my boundary.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. You
say, oh yeah, and then I meet the therapist who brings the birthday cake for the kid, the therapy. So, all right. Then, there was other context to that, but, there's breaking about, lending people money or sharing too much, taking them to your church, and all those kind of boundary things. All of those things have happened in supervision that I've had. So, yeah. So, but back to the craft,
Sure.
Back to the craft. So if you work at the craft, then when all this other stuff that we've just been talking about happens, you've got your craft to fall back on. You've got that in your bones so that you can be thinking about all that other stuff and not, how am I going to frame up this question? Though that happens, I will say, hang on a second.
Mm-hmm.
And then I might start to summarize kind of to myself. So we know this and we know this. And okay, so the question I want to ask is this. Steve DeShazer used to look at the floor and look at the ceiling and look at the floor. Douglas Flemons used to gaze off into the corner of the room.
For you guys, Douglas Flemons is on my dissertation committee, and he's amazing. And
one of my supervisors and teachers, right?
He can be silent for
a long time.
You can't even count. You just wait. Yeah.
But it's okay to think. Mm-hmm. Therapy is not radio. It's okay to have dead air. Actually, it's not dead. It's very active in thinking. You can smell the burning.
It's active
you know.
but silent.
Yes, exactly. So, and that's sometimes you've really put a good question together when they go silent and they're thinking. Sometimes you get the feedback of, well, that's a really good question, or I never really thought of it that way. Those are the money questions. But again, I don't know when they happen. When they happen, it's a joy. That's my present, gift to me. They've given me a gift of saying that really made them pause and think. Because more often than not, people tell the stories that they know, like Michael White would talk about. They tell the stories that they know over and over and over again. And by asking questions that allow them to tell a different variation on the story, or to step over and see the story from a different perspective, is all the stuff of therapy. That's where change happens. And when that happens in the context of family members, then new variations of the story then get embroidered on and put into the family album, right, to be preserved and perpetuated, and hopefully in a direction that's more useful for the family.
Yeah, I love that. The story becomes bigger, expanded,
richer,
more nuances.
Yeah, more variations on. Yeah.
So I know that I, bring in all sorts of things because my head goes in a lot of different places. So hopefully you guys don't mind. But one of the things I've been thinking about is how we can take responsibility in therapy and in life for when we don't get the answer we wanted. So for example, if you ask a question and you realize that, now the client gives you an answer and you realize, oh, wait, I didn't want that. How you might be able to say, okay, I thank you for that. I didn't intend to get that information. I more wanted to go over here. That's my fault. So let me try to, I don't know, rephrase and get closer to the information that I might need or something like that. But
okay, I might think all that stuff. I wouldn't say all that stuff, but I'd think all that stuff.
Right. So what do you do if you don't say all that stuff? What do you do when you get an answer you don't want?
Validate it. Oh, okay. So you're thinking like that. Okay. All right. So now what I'm curious about is, right. So I was going down this road thinking that the next question was going to get me the next piece of the story that I was curious about, but they took me over here. Oh, okay. So now I know this over here too. I may use it, I may not. No information is wasted. You never know when you're going to go back and weave that piece in, right? You may weave it back in as a validation. Okay. Oh, so the reason you do what you do is because this over here that makes you so unhappy, or this is your perception of the problem. Okay. So I may make it woven back in. Well, they've already woven it in. It's me then highlighting how that makes sense. Okay. So if I see it, I validate it, appreciate it. Okay. Right. I'm thinking to myself, I may not use that right now. Okay. So that's there. And so now I'm asking about over here. And this may become then a basis of compare and contrast. So I may have gone into a room I didn't mean to go into, but it's probably good that I know that room is there.
And they don't need to know that.
And they don't need to know that I didn't mean to go in there. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. They don't need to know that, because they don't know what this process of therapy was. If they did, they wouldn't need me. They wouldn't need us, right? If they could figure all this stuff out.
So how easy it is then to navigate, should you get an answer and you maybe you phrase the question in a way that, or the example that you were given. Let me take a breath. One is perhaps you rephrase the question in a way that didn't elicit the information that you wanted. Another possibility is, as you mentioned earlier, Annalyn, about, oh my goodness, I just lost my thought. Well, regardless, there are lots of ways that we can land somewhere that we didn't intend to.
Yes.
That it doesn't mean that it breaks our flow. It doesn't mean that there's any problem with that, you can just use those basic skills, validating, summarizing, empathizing, and move on and try to get closer.
Absolutely. I liken it to a maze. I believe Bateson wrote about this, I'm not sure who, but that people were running rats through a maze. And a purpose of running rats through the maze is to see how quickly they learn the maze and go from point A to point B directly. That they know, they learn the maze and they can get through it. Well, then they thought, okay, well, let's use ferrets. Ferrets are smart. I bet they're as smart as rats. So they would run the ferrets, okay? And you would expect the first couple of times that they would go off into all the little dead ends and things and learn. And then they figured, okay, so now they've done that a couple of times, they should be able to go straight through the maze. No, the ferret still goes and looks off in all the little corners and stuff, because the ferret, I'm anthropomorphizing, does not assume that just because the cheese was there last time, that it's going to be there this time. And so we need to be more like ferrets, that we go off into all these little corners and dead ends, because like a video game, you might go off on a dead end that was dead end last time, but there might be a door this time. So you never know when you retread back through information what door might open that you didn't know was there. And so it's okay to land in a place that you didn't expect. You just back out and go down another one.
It's all a gift.
It's all information.
It's all information.
It's all grist for the mill, as they say.
Yeah, and as you were saying this at the end, I remembered that what I wanted to mention was the possibility of a client not being able to hear a question, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it's that, sometimes it's rephrasing. And that's not something that I've heard before. I haven't heard someone talk about a question being so outside of a person's experience. I know it to be true. Like as soon as you said it, I was like, yes, like I know this to be true, that it's so outside of their, just their experience, how people talk to them, what they're used to, that they can't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how we would recognize it. Like I'm a little bit in awe of your intern or your colleague. I can't remember what it was that she knew to say.
We had talked about it. We had talked about this. We had talked about how sometimes you have to either rephrase or repeat your question because the client can't hear it. Right now, you made most often, if I ask a question and they answer a different question, well, that's okay. That's the question they heard, and
right.
That's fine. But if my question is intended as an intervention and I really want to know the answer to this question, I might have to ask it either a couple of different ways or have to just keep asking it. And I might have to ask it in different ways through voice inflection. I might have to slow it down. But really, what I want to know is give it to them in little pieces, right? Because they heard what they heard, but maybe not what I said.
Excuse me.
And this happens all the time with us in our personal relationships. When you say something and you get a blowback that you didn't expect, it's like, whoa, that's not what I said. What did you hear? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that'll happen in therapy as well. Okay, so what did you hear me say just now, right? I don't have the investment in the relationship, so I'm allowed to ask those kind of questions that only couples who've gone through a whole lot of therapy kids can ask of each other necessarily. So yeah, because I don't have the emotional investment. That's the benefit of being a therapist. I don't have the emotional investment in whatever the answer is. I'm just curious about the answer.
Well, I have two things that I want to say. One goes back to the if you keep asking the question, right? So if for some reason you don't say it slowly, and then maybe you remember that you should, or something you want to redo or keep doing or repeating, how do you keep the client engaged without, right? So that's a place where
you ask it and they answer, right? And you go, okay. And so let me ask this again. And you ask the question again, and you do it in a very deliberate way. And usually, they finally arrive when they take a deep breath, because then they actually heard the question.
So you just say, okay, let me ask it again, even if you
Yeah.
have to do it 5 times without doing the packaging.
Sometimes you can, that can be one of your variations. It's sort of like Mozart's, variations on a theme, right? I might vary it each time in an attempt to package it or deliver it in a way that they can hear it. Yes, you might have to do that. Yeah.
It's like, I'm picturing that interchange, like exchange, maybe it's a better word.
Yeah.
The other thing, and it's a little bit, it's based on what you said last, which is you don't have the emotional investment in therapy. But what's interesting is that I'm thinking I do that when I do have the emotional investment, like the meta communication. I might be more likely, not that I wouldn't do it in therapy, of course, but that it's the emotional investment that leads me to comment on what's happening, like where did it go wrong, or...
two different kinds of investments.
Okay.
2 different kinds of investments. Okay.
Yeah, great.
When in my personal relationship, when I ask a question, I want a particular answer that's very, very specific. When I'm asking a question in therapy, more often than not, I'm interested in a description in general. I'm not looking for the yes or no. When I say, so do you want to save your marriage? I don't care whether they say yes or no.
True.
If I turn to my spouse, do you want to save our marriage? I probably have an investment in which answer I get.
Sure.
So that's what I mean by I don't have an investment in the answer.
Right. Yeah, that's another very complicated question about, another track that we can go with relationships. But yes, of course, you have an investment, meaning that the answer matters.
The answer matters, but the specific answer doesn't matter. I'm just looking for what is the answer.
In therapy.
I'm being the qualitative researcher at that point. What's going on around here? As opposed to, you need to tell me this answer. That's where the don't you think, blah, 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 that's that kind of question of I'm leading you to this particular answer. And really, which is more about validating me, the therapist, than being curious about you, the client.
Right.
Which is why those questions tend to fall on their face.
Okay.
And disconnect, those are disconnect questions as opposed to joining questions. I don't want to do anything that makes the therapist or the client rear back and, in Law and Order, that's the kind of question where the suspect says, get out of my house, right? So I don't want that kind of question. So I always want questions that engage, that get them curious about what's going on, that tells me a story, that gives me more stuff to play with, that kind of stuff. I'm looking for metaphors, which is a whole other thing to do, right? But but crafting questions, that's what you get back when you craft questions well. There's no right or wrong questions. There's just better, more or less useful questions. And it's only through experimentation that you begin to recognize what are the most useful ones in this situation, or with your particular model, or with this particular client.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but crafting questions for model is the advanced stage, right? Which is our next.
That's kind of that next level. So you have to be able to know when an open or a closed or a relational question is coming out of your mouth before you can start thinking about how was that question informed by my model. Okay,
so my last question for you, and who knows where it'll go, is why, and I have my own sense of this and answer to this, but I want to know yours. Why do you take why away from students and give it back when they graduate or when they learn narrative?
The way we use the word why in our common culture, it tends to be fairly pejorative. So when mom says, why didn't you clean your room? She doesn't want to know why. She doesn't want anything you say is not going to be a good enough answer. And I will say that. It's really not. It's really not, right? Or why did you do that implies, stupid, right? So there's a lot of pejoratives wrapped up in that word. Okay. Now, there are times when I will very carefully craft a question that doesn't have why in it, and the client will say, "Do you mean why?" Sure. Right?
I did
So
all that work.
all that work to avoid why, but okay, fine, yeah, why? But I think it's a way of being more purposeful about how you ask a question. And why, by the way, is never ending. So I can ask you, I can say, so why did you do that? But then why did you do that? Well, then why was that? Right? It never gets anywhere. It just goes on and on and on and on. Now, if you're looking for a root cause analysis, then 5 whys in a row is a great way to get back to how did this happen, right? But that's a different kind of work. That's not therapy. I'm not an investigator, right? I am a therapist. Different. I'm there for a different purpose.
I think this is really tough to, as you say, sometimes for new therapists to get, and this idea, and my answer is, of course, that it relies on the idea that clients know the answer, right? That they know the intention behind their behavior, or that insight leads to change. Those are some of the assumptions of asking why questions.
Neither of which do I embrace.
Right.
Yes.
So that doesn't, I mean, it's not something that most systemic therapists embrace, or I don't know, the theory maybe doesn't embrace, right? The idea of that insight leads to change. It depends on, the modern versus modern, but these days that's certainly more common. Then there's also another conversation that I have with therapists is that I think is related is, and I'll come back to the essence of it, but it's this sense of when you work with a couple, do you separate the couple? Like, do you meet with, the husband first and then the wife, and then you bring them together, or do you never separate them? So where you land on that has a lot to do with what you believe your role is. And usually when people separate them, they have some sense that as a therapist, they need to know the truth, and that a client is more apt or open to telling the truth if they're alone, right? So I'll just let you know that I never separate couples because I believe that it's my job to help them communicate. And so if they can't really talk in each other's presence, then the process of therapy is to increase the comfort and safety of that. And I don't want to know the truth, right? So I don't, I'm not trying to find.
Well, we don't believe there is truth with the capital T.
Okay.
There's only, yeah.
Right. We can talk about the underlying philosophy, postmodernism, etc., but I don't even want to know their truth outside of the context of their truth is in the relationship, right? Mm-hmm. So I never separate them. So this is a common conversation that I have. And of course, all therapists can make that decision. But it's that idea, I'm not an investigator, nor do I want to be in a position of, finding, unless it's, as you're saying, the question, which is like the ferret. That's a little different. That's searching for the things that have not been said versus searching.
Yeah. Well, I'm the guided tour. I'm looking for a guided tour in their world.
Right.
Yeah.
Great metaphors. So, Annalyn, is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't talk about, or perhaps you can give us, there's that, and then also before we finish, give us a quick summary of the question type.
So without going back and watching all this, I don't know that I would be competent at this point to be able to say anything any more useful. But I can talk about that basically I've identified or we've co-constructed in this moment 5 different kinds of questions: the yes, no, the direct question with a short answer, an open question that's direct, the relational question, and the circular question, right? And that all of them are useful. All of them have great purposes and get different kinds of data into the room that is useful, and that it's a nice mix of them that's important, but also purposefulness of that you're not going to ask a yes no question if what you're looking for is a story, right? So you have to know what it is that you're looking for. And you can always rephrase it. If it comes out wrong, you can say, wait, hang on, let me rephrase that. So I think that's important. I think it's, so once you learn how to craft questions and can sit down and write 5 who questions and 5 how questions and 5 what questions and just rattle them off and just one question after another, once you get good at that, Then you can start thinking about packaging and how the question comes out of, it's sort of like the dirt of the validating, empathizing, summarizing, out of which this flower of a question comes out, which I don't know that my questions are that flowery, but that metaphor that it coming out of, nurtured by those validating, empathizing, summarizing client language stuff, right? And the closer you can stay to client language with your questions, I think the better. Unless you're are purposefully reframing something, right? And then, the idea of that if you land in a funny place, if you're traveling the maze and looking at all these dead ends, it's okay to hit a dead end, because you're just a stranger here. You're a stranger in a strange land, right? And so you didn't know that left turn would go into that dead end. Okay, so you back out and you go someplace else. But you remember that that's over there, because someday you might go back there. I would say 99% not, but you never know. That might, that end up in that corridor will be a door to a whole new set of ideas that might now be useful, but weren't back when you first were there. So I guess that's the curiosity piece, isn't it? That we're curious. And I would say we are also empathetic, but that's not our primary mode, right? Curiosity, I think, is our primary mode. And that's why, as much as I can channel being a qualitative researcher to be curious, keeps me from becoming the interrogator. Or the teacher. That's my other thing that I'm tempted to do, right? So if I stay in curiosity, then I'm much less likely to be biased, judgmental, teacher, advisor, all these other roles that I know are antithetical to good therapy.
So keep telling ourselves, stay curious.
Stay curious. Stay curious. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today, Annalyn.
My pleasure.